The room was dark, only one dim light hanging from the ceiling. In the center sat the alien widow, her hands tied, a rough sack pulled over her head. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of damp stone and cold metal. A human guard stood near the door, shifting uncomfortably as he heard her slow breathing. Everyone in the base had been told the same words. Don't listen to her. She's crazy. That sentence was repeated so often that it felt like a command carved into their minds. It was easier to obey, easier not to think, but tonight, the silence felt different. The guard found himself staring at her still figure, wondering what truth could hide behind the sack. The widow had been captured weeks ago after the last great battle. Her people were gone, wiped from the stars, and now she was the last one alive instead of treating her like a prisoner of war. They left her in chains, left her to starve. The soldiers laughed sometimes, calling her dangerous, calling her mad, but none of them ever dared to listen to her voice. Her words were forbidden as if her voice carried poison. The guard had joined the army only months before the war ended. He was young, unsure, and still believed in the idea of honor. But honor was hard to find in this place. Every day he saw the widow sitting in silence, weaker and weaker, her thin frame hidden under the sack. Her head always bowed. She did not fight. She did not scream. She only waited. And that waiting made him uneasy. The stories about her were strange. Some soldiers said she could twist human minds with a single sentence. Others claimed she had secrets about hidden weapons. And some whispered she had killed her own husband. Earning the name Widow, no one knew which story was true. But all believed one thing: her words must never be heard. One night, when the hallways were empty and the base was quiet, the guard heard something, a soft sound muffled under the sack. It was not laughter, not madness, but something else. It sounded like sorrow, like someone whispering to herself in the dark. The guard froze, his heart racing. He told himself to ignore it, to remember the warning, but his curiosity was stronger. He leaned closer, trying to catch the sound. The widow whispered again, her voice faint but clear. It was not a scream, not a curse. It was a word, simple and sharp. The guard could not believe it. She had whispered, help. His throat went dry. No one had ever said she begged for help. They said she was insane, violent, dangerous. But her voice was soft, broken, almost human. The guard stepped back, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He wanted to run, but something inside him told him to stay. For the rest of the night, he could not forget her voice. He kept hearing it, circling in his head. Help. It did not sound like madness. It sounded like truth. He began to wonder. Why was she silenced? If she was truly insane, why not let her speak? Why fear the words of a starving widow? The next day, the other soldiers joked as usual. One said the sack should never be removed. Another laughed, saying if anyone listened to her, they would go insane. The guard laughed with them, pretending to believe, but deep down, he carried the secret of her whisper, and that secret burned inside him. That night, the guard returned to his post. The widow sat as always, motionless. Her breathing was slow, shallow, weak. He wondered if she would even survive another day. Something inside him told him this might be the last chance to know the truth. His hands shook as he reached forward. Slowly, carefully, he touched the sack. The rough fabric scratched against his fingers. One pull and he could see her face, one pull and he could hear her true words. He stopped, his heart racing. What if the stories were true? What if she was dangerous, but what if they were lying? What if she held the truth that no one wanted to hear? The widow lifted her head slightly, sensing his hesitation even under the sack. Her presence felt strong. She did not speak this time, she only waited. The silence was heavier than chains. The guard swallowed hard, torn between fear and curiosity. In that moment, he realized something strange. He was more afraid of the humans who told him not to listen than of the widow herself. Why did they fear her so much? Why did they starve her instead of ending her life? Why did they silence her instead of letting her speak? His fingers tightened on the sack. He was about to pull it away. The air felt colder, the room smaller. The silence grew unbearable, and then, in the stillness, the widow whispered again. Her voice was calm, quiet, almost like a secret meant only for him. They lied to you, she said. The guard froze. His breath caught in his chest. Those words cut deeper than any weapon. Those words promised danger, truth, and something far greater than madness. In that moment, the guard knew one thing. His life would never be the same again. The guard could not sleep that night. Her words echoed inside his head. twisting and turning until every corner of his mind felt heavy. "They lied to you," she had said, her voice calm, her tone sharper than any blade. He kept asking himself who lied and why. The command, the officers, the soldiers, everyone had told him never to listen. But now he had listened, and he could not forget. The next day the base was filled with noise. Engines roared, boots pounded the floor. Voices carried orders down the halls. But to the guard it all sounded empty. He looked at his fellow soldiers, their laughter, their cruel jokes, their casual talk about killing, and he wondered, had they all heard her too? Had they all chosen to bury it deep inside? Or was he the only one weak enough to listen? He tried to tell himself it was a trick. Maybe she wanted to break him. Maybe she wanted him to doubt his people. But the sound of her whisper was not madness. Not even anger. It was sorrow, heavy sorrow, the kind that only comes from someone who has lost everything. And that truth gnawed at his heart like fire. That night, when the base was quiet again, he returned to his post outside her cell. The widow sat in the same position, sack over her head, body frail, hands bound. She looked like a shadow fading into the darkness. But the air around her felt alive, as if her silence carried weight, as if the stone walls themselves leaned closer to hear her breathe. The guard stood near the bars, trying to convince himself not to speak. He told himself to stay quiet, to remember the warnings. But then he remembered her whisper, and before he knew it, words slipped from his mouth. "Why did you say that?" he asked softly. "What did you mean?" The widow did not move. For a long time there was only silence. The guard thought maybe she would ignore him. But then her voice came again, soft, faint, yet sharp enough to cut the air. "Because they fear me," she whispered. "Not for what I am, but for what I know." The guard's chest tightened. Every instinct told him to stop listening, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He glanced at the door, making sure no one was near. Then he leaned closer to the bars. "What do you know?" he asked, his voice trembling. The widow's head tilted slightly under the sack. Her breathing was weak, yet her words carried strength. "The war was never ours," she said. "We did not start it. We were forced into it." The guard's blood turned cold. That could not be true. Every story he had been told, every lesson from training, every word from the commanders, said her kind had attacked first, that they were monsters who slaughtered without reason. But her voice carried no madness, no hate. It carried a strange weight, a weight that felt like truth. "You are lying," the guard whispered, though his voice sounded weak. "If you didn't start it, then who did?" For a moment the widow was silent again. Then she said, "Your own." The guard stepped back, his heart pounding. He wanted to shout, to call her insane, to remind himself of the warning, but the words would not come. Deep inside he felt her whisper crawling like fire through the cracks of his beliefs. If what she said was true, then everything he had fought for was built on a lie. That night he could not rest. Every creak in the walls, every shadow in the corners felt alive. It was as if the darkness itself whispered to him, repeating her words again and again. "They lied to you? Your own." He pressed his hands over his ears. But the voice was inside, not outside. The next morning he tried to distract himself. He polished his weapon, joined drills, laughed at the crude jokes of the others. But every time he looked at them, he wondered if they knew. Maybe they all lived in the lie and accepted it. Maybe they silenced her because they could not face the truth. Maybe he was the only fool who dared to listen. As the day turned to night, he found himself standing outside her cell again. He told himself he would not speak this time, but the silence between them was louder than any scream. Finally, he whispered through the bars, "Why are you still alive?" The widow lifted her head slightly. Her voice came faint but steady. "Because they need me to remain quiet. If I die, suspicion will grow. If I live and starve, they can call me mad. But the truth does not die with silence." The guard's skin crawled. He felt both fear and pity. This was no screaming monster, no raging enemy. This was a broken soul holding on to secrets too heavy for silence. And he could not stop himself from asking the forbidden question. "What truth?" The widow leaned forward, the sack shifting as if her hidden eyes searched for his. Then she whispered, her voice softer than the hum of the air itself. "There is another war coming." The guard's heart froze. Her words sank deep into him like chains. A war coming, not from her people. They were gone, destroyed, but from someone else, someone his commanders had chosen not to name. He gripped the bars, torn between duty and fear. He wanted to demand more, but footsteps echoed down the hall. Another soldier was coming. The guard stepped back quickly, straightening his posture, pretending nothing had happened. The widow lowered her head again, silent. The sack covered her face once more, but her whisper still burned inside his mind. There is another war coming. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every breath he took felt heavy, for the first time. He was more afraid of the humans around him than of the alien widow left to starve in chains. And deep inside, he knew he would return to her cell again. Because once you hear the truth, silence can never hold you again. The guard's hand shook as he carried the lantern into the narrow hall. The flickering light stretched long shadows across the cold stone walls. Every step echoed like a warning, yet he could not stop. He told himself he would not return. He told himself it was too dangerous, but here he was again, drawn to the cell as if her whispers had hooked into his very soul. The widow sat as always, motionless, the sack still covering her head. Her body looked weaker now, her arms thin as bones, her shoulders curved with exhaustion. She should not have survived this long, yet she remained. It was as if something stronger than flesh kept her alive, something hidden beneath the silence. The guard stood before the bars, staring. He felt the weight of fear pressing on his chest. One voice in his head told him to walk away. Another urged him to listen, and then, before he realized, he whispered, "Tell me the truth." The widow tilted her head slightly. Her breathing was shallow, but her words came steady. "You are ready now," she said softly. "Then listen." The guard's skin prickled. He glanced around, making sure no one else was near. Then, slowly, he reached for the sack. His fingers trembled as he pulled it away, revealing the face of the one everyone had called mad. The cloth fell, and for the first time he saw her. Her skin was pale silver, stretched tight against her bones. Her eyes glowed faintly, not with rage but with a sad light that seemed ancient. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks hollow. Yet her presence filled the room with something heavy and unshakable. The guard's breath caught. She did not look like a monster. She looked like someone who had carried too many burdens, someone broken yet unbroken. And when she spoke, her voice was not madness, it was calm, deliberate, filled with the weight of memory. "They told you we started the war," she said, "but we did not. They needed an enemy. And so they made one." The guard shook his head. But his heart was racing. He wanted to deny her words, yet the sorrow in her eyes made it hard to call her a liar. "Who needed an enemy?" he asked. His voice was thin, almost desperate. The widow leaned closer, her chains rattling softly. "Your leaders," she whispered. "The war gave them power. It gave them fear to control you. It gave them reason to build weapons, to silence questions, to take more than they ever needed." The guard felt his stomach twist. He remembered the speeches, the endless parades, the chants of victory, all of it fueled by hatred of her people. If her words were true, then he had been nothing but a tool in their hands. "You expect me to believe this," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "I do not expect you to believe," the widow said, her eyes burning faintly in the lantern light. "I expect you to see when the time comes, when the truth arrives at your door." The guard gripped the bars tightly. "What truth?" he demanded. "What are you hiding?" The widow lowered her voice. "There is something left, something buried. A secret they fear more than my words." Her gaze sharpened. Her tone turned heavier. "If I tell you, you will be marked. If you carry this truth, you can never return to who you were." The guard swallowed hard. His chest ached with fear, but curiosity burned brighter. "Tell me," he whispered. The widow closed her eyes, as if gathering strength. Then she spoke slowly, each word heavy as stone. "My husband was not killed by us," she said. "He was killed by them, your kind, because he discovered what they were hiding." The guard froze. This was not the story he had been told. They said she murdered her husband, that grief had driven her mad. But now her voice carried something different. Not madness, but grief too real to fake. "They framed me," the widow continued, her chains clinking as she shifted. "They put the sack over my head, called me insane, and left me here to die, because if I spoke, I could unravel the lie that keeps their empire strong." The guard felt his knees weaken. Her words cut deep, deeper than he wanted to admit. He wanted to believe she was lying, that the stories were true, but the sadness in her voice pierced his heart. And for the first time, he wondered if everything he had been taught was built on blood and shadows. He took a step back, shaking his head. "Why tell me?" he whispered. Why not stay silent? The widow's eyes locked onto his, glowing faintly in the dark. Because you listened, she said. You are not the first, but you may be the last. Her words filled the air like a storm about to break. The guard felt the walls close in, the silence too heavy to bear. He turned to leave, but her voice followed. Softer, sharper, unforgettable. There is more buried under your cities, under your bases, under the soil of your world. They fear me because I know where it is, and if it rises, no one will be safe. The guard stopped at the door. His hand trembling on the handle, he did not want to ask, but the question escaped his lips before he could stop it. What is buried? The widow's lips curved into something between sorrow and warning. Then she whispered, the beginning of the next war. The guard felt his blood run cold. Her words hung in the darkness. Wrapping around him like chains, he stepped into the hall, but he knew there was no escaping them now. The truth had been spoken, and it clung to him like fire, and deep inside, he feared that she was not lying. He feared that everything she had said was only the beginning. The guard could not shake her words. Every moment after leaving her cell felt like walking through fog. Orders were shouted, meals were served, drills carried on, but nothing reached him. Her whisper clung to his mind like smoke. There is more buried under your cities. The beginning of the next war. He tried to push the thought away, told himself she was manipulating him, but then he remembered her eyes, glowing faintly in the lantern's light, filled with grief, not madness. He remembered the way her voice trembled when she spoke of her husband. Lies could be polished, but sorrow could not. The guard found himself watching the officers more closely now, their meetings behind locked doors, their quick glances when questions were asked. He noticed things he had ignored before, supplies moving in secret, coded orders whispered in corners, patrols changed without reason. Something was happening beyond the surface of duty, something hidden. That night he returned to her again. Unable to resist, the sack still covered her head, but now he knew the face behind it. He knew her words, and they burned inside him. He stepped close to the bars, lowering his voice to a whisper. What is it? He asked. What is buried under our cities? The widow did not move for a long moment. Then she spoke, slow and steady. The enemy you were told to fear was not us. They live among you. Hidden, patient, waiting. The guard frowned, his pulse quickening. What do you mean? He pressed. What enemy? The widow leaned forward, chains rattling softly. When the war began, you were told we struck first, but that was not the truth. There were humans who wanted power beyond borders. They needed chaos. They needed an enemy to unite against. So they used us. They lit the fire and blamed our people. The guard felt his stomach twist. Her words sounded like treason, dangerous even to hear. Yet each sentence seemed to fit into shadows he had never dared to examine. The sudden war, the endless fear, the rise of authority over freedom. Pieces that had never made sense now clicked together with dreadful clarity. Why tell me this? He asked, his voice low and unsteady. Why not scream it to everyone? The widow gave a bitter smile beneath the sack, though he could almost see it. Because they would never let me. Because the louder I speak, the deeper they bury me. But if one soldier listens, if one seed is planted, the lie begins to crack. The guard gripped the bars tighter. Then what do they fear under the cities? The widow's voice grew colder. They fear what my husband found. Something left long before your people reached the stars. Machines buried deep, sleeping, waiting. Not ours, not yours, something older. Something that will wake when the world is ready. The guard's skin crawled. It sounded impossible, yet the weight of her words pressed against him. Why would they hide this? He whispered. Why not destroy it? They cannot, the widow replied, her voice thin but sharp. It cannot be destroyed, only controlled. And those who control it will rule. Your leaders want it for themselves. They silenced us to keep it secret. But secrets have a way of breaking free. The guard's breath came faster. He remembered the strange shipments, the sealed convoys that moved at night. He remembered the officers' careful words when asked about unexplained drills. And he realized it all fit, like pieces of a hidden map. A sudden noise echoed down the hall, footsteps approaching. The guard froze, glancing back quickly. He could not be seen speaking to her again, not now. Not when his heart carried the weight of forbidden truths. He turned away, straightening his posture, pretending to be on silent watch. 2 soldiers passed by, laughing. Never sparing the widow a glance, they walked on. their voices fading into the distance. When the sound was gone, the guard exhaled, sweat on his brow. He turned back, whispering, "If this is true, then why tell me I am no leader, I have no power?" The widow lifted her head under the sack, her faint glow piercing even through the cloth. Because power lies not in leaders but in those who see one spark can light a fire. One voice can grow into many, and if you do nothing, then you will march into the next war blind. The question is simple, soldier. Will you remain blind, or will you see? The guard's throat tightened. Every part of him wanted to run, to bury her words deep and forget them. But his heart would not allow it. The weight of truth was heavier than silence. And now he carried it, whether he wanted to or not. That night he lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. The laughter of other soldiers filled the barracks, but he felt alone, colder than ever before. He closed his eyes and saw her face again, pale, hollow, yet burning with hidden fire. Her whisper echoed again and again. "There is another war coming. They live among you, hidden, waiting." And the guard realized something terrifying. He was no longer afraid of her. He was afraid of his own people. The guard sat in the mess hall, but the food on his tray turned to ash in his mouth. Around him soldiers laughed, cursed, and argued, their voices filling the air with noise. Yet he heard nothing except her whispers. "They live among you, hidden, waiting. The next war is already beneath your feet." He clenched his fists under the table, trying to force the thoughts away. But every time an officer walked past, every time he saw sealed crates being moved at night, every time a door slammed shut in a restricted hallway, the whispers returned stronger. It was as if she had opened a door in his mind, and now nothing could close it again. That night, when the barracks fell silent, the guard slipped away. His boots echoed softly on the stone floor as he made his way back to the cell. His heart raced, his palms damp. He told himself he should stop, that this path would lead to ruin. But still he walked, drawn back to her like a moth to flame. The widow sat as before, sack over her head, chains around her wrists, her body so frail she seemed more shadow than flesh. Yet her presence filled the room like a storm waiting to break. The guard stepped close to the bars, his voice low. "Why me?" he asked. "Why tell me these things?" The widow tilted her head, her voice slow and steady. "Because choice is the one weapon they cannot control. You can obey, or you can question, and that choice shapes what follows." The guard's chest tightened. "You speak of war, of secrets buried under our cities, of enemies hiding among us, but what can I do? I am only a soldier. I follow orders." The widow's whisper cut through the darkness. "Then choose which orders you will follow." The guard gritted his teeth. Her words were simple, but they split his heart in two. If he believed her, he would be betraying everything he had sworn to protect. If he ignored her, he might be walking blindly into a war that could destroy them all. He thought of his fellow soldiers laughing in the barracks, men and women who had trusted the same leaders. He thought of the faces of those who had died in the war. All of them told they were fighting for survival, and he thought of her eyes glowing faintly beneath the sack, filled with sorrow instead of madness. His voice trembled as he asked, "If what you say is true, what do you want from me?" The widow leaned closer, her chains rattling like broken wings. "I want nothing for myself," she whispered. "I am already lost." They made sure of that. "What I want is for you to see the truth before it swallows you. I want you to remember my words when the world burns again." The guard swallowed hard. Her voice carried no plea for freedom, no promise of reward, only a warning heavy with despair. And somehow that made it more believable. He turned to leave, but her whisper followed him like a shadow. "You cannot unhear the truth. You will have to choose, soldier, and when the moment comes, silence will kill more than words." That night in his bunk, he tossed and turned. Sleep never came, his mind replaying her words. He thought of pulling the sack away again, of freeing her from chains, of demanding answers from the officers. But each path ended in danger. Each path ended with him branded a traitor. When morning came, his eyes were bloodshot, his body heavy with exhaustion. He stumbled into drills, but his movements were slow. His mind elsewhere, an officer barked at him, suspicion flashing in the man's eyes. The guard forced himself to nod, to act obedient, but inside, doubt grew stronger. That evening, as the sun bled red against the horizon, the guard returned to the widow once more. This time he did not wait, did not whisper timidly. He pulled the sack from her head, her pale face revealed again, her glowing eyes locking onto his. Tell me everything, he said, his voice shaking. No more half-truths, no more riddles, tell me what you know. The widow studied him, her thin lips curling into something that was not quite a smile. You are ready, she whispered. But once you hear, there will be no return. No safe path back to the life you knew. Tell me, he insisted. Her chains rattled as she straightened, her hollow cheeks casting shadows in the lantern light. My people discovered the buried machines first, she said. We did not understand them, but we knew they were not ours. Not yours. Something ancient, something waiting. My husband believed they were built to awaken when certain signals were sent. He believed your leaders had already found a way to control them. The guard's stomach twisted. And that is why they killed him, he whispered. The widow's eyes glowed brighter for a moment. Yes, he tried to expose them, and for that he was silenced. And I was blamed, so no one would listen when I spoke. The guard felt his throat dry. If this was true, then the war had not been about survival at all. It had been about power. Power drawn from something older than both their races. Power waiting beneath their very feet. You see now, the widow whispered. You stand at a crossroad. You can close your eyes and remain their weapon, or you can open them and carry the truth. But once the machines rise, there will be no time left to choose. The guard's chest heaved, his hands trembling, her words carved deeper than blades. He realized she was right. He had to choose, and as he stared at her, chained and starving yet unbroken, he knew his choice would decide more than his own life. It could decide the fate of humanity itself. The guard could no longer live in silence. Every order he obeyed, every salute he gave, every word of loyalty he spoke felt hollow. The widow's voice followed him everywhere. You must choose. The machines will rise and the truth cannot stay buried. At night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the barracks. He could hear the breathing of other soldiers, the steady rhythm of men who slept without doubt. He envied them, but he also pitied them. They were blind, and he could never be blind again. Days turned into weeks, and the widow grew weaker. Her skin clung tighter to her bones, her breathing grew shallow. The sack over her head stayed in place when others were near. But the guard, whenever he could, removed it in secret. He listened to her whispers, pieces of the story no one else dared to hear. She spoke of buried vaults, sealed under human cities. She spoke of symbols older than either of their races. She spoke of maps her husband had drawn, maps hidden before his death. And every word made the guard feel the weight of a storm building in the distance. One night, when the base was quieter than usual, he entered the cell. He had stolen a small key from the storage room, his hands shaking as he slipped it into the lock. The door creaked open, and for the first time he stepped inside. The widow lifted her head slowly, her glowing eyes meeting his. You should not be here, she whispered. If they find you, both our lives will end. The guard knelt beside her, his breath quick. If I do nothing, both our lives will end anyway, he said. I cannot keep pretending. Her chains rattled as she shifted. You would risk everything for me, she asked. Her voice calm but heavy. Not for you, the guard said. For the truth. His hands shook as he unlocked her wrists, the metal clanging against the stone floor. Her thin arms fell forward. Free for the first time in weeks, she rubbed her raw skin, her face unreadable. Then she whispered, You have chosen? The guard swallowed hard. I need proof, he said. If I go to them with only your words, I will be executed. But if I can find what your husband left behind, I can show the world. The widow's hollow eyes glowed brighter. You would carry this burden, she whispered. You would walk the path he died for. The guard nodded, though fear tightened his chest. Tell me where. She closed her eyes, her voice soft. There is a vault beneath this very base, a chamber your leaders guard in secret. My husband discovered it before he was silenced. That is why they keep me here. Not only to starve me, but to keep me close. Because if I die far from it, suspicion may rise. But if I vanish within their walls, the secret remains theirs. The guard's heart pounded. A vault beneath their feet all this time. He had walked these halls without knowing what lay below. How do I reach it? He asked quickly. The widow leaned closer, whispering, There is a hatch in the lower tunnel sealed with codes. But my husband carved the sequence into the stone before they killed him. He hoped one day someone would see, someone would listen. The guard's hands tightened into fists. He could already picture the tunnels, the restricted sections guarded by armed soldiers. Reaching the hatch would be almost impossible, but he could not turn back now. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hall. The guard froze. quickly pulling the sack back over her head and slipping out of the cell. Another soldier appeared, yawning, carrying a lantern. "You still on watch?" the man asked, his voice lazy. The guard forced a nod, hiding his pounding heart. The soldier muttered something and walked on, never guessing what had just happened. When the sound faded, the guard exhaled, sweat dripping down his brow. He looked back at the cell, the widow now still and silent again, and he knew there was no turning back. That night he made his decision. He would find the vault. He would uncover what lay beneath, and he would carry the truth even if it destroyed him. The next day he began to prepare. He studied patrol routes. He memorized the schedules of guards. He stole small items from storage, an old lantern, a length of rope, scraps of food. Every piece of preparation felt like stepping closer to treason, but also closer to freedom. The widow watched him whenever he came, her glowing eyes steady. "You will be hunted," she warned. "They will not forgive this." The guard met her gaze, his voice firm. "Then let them hunt, but I will not live blind." On the third night, when the moonlight barely touched the ground outside, he slipped into the lower tunnels. The air was colder here, the stone walls damp. The smell of rust thick, his lantern flickered, throwing shadows that seemed alive. Every creak, every drip of water felt like a warning. He found the wall she had spoken of. At first it looked plain, but as he moved the lantern closer, he saw it. Carvings etched faintly into the stone, almost invisible symbols, strange yet ordered. Numbers hidden within patterns, the code. His hands trembled as he traced them. This was real, she had spoken truth. Behind him the silence felt heavy, as if the tunnels themselves were holding their breath. He turned the wheel beside the hatch, his heart pounding. The stone groaned, the air hissed, and the hatch slowly shifted, opening into blackness. The guard stared into the darkness below. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of something ancient, something untouched for centuries. He felt both fear and awe. The widow had not lied. The vault was real, and now standing at its threshold, he knew his life would never be the same. The guard stood at the open hatch, the cold air rushing up from below like the breath of a sleeping giant. For a long moment he could not move. His lantern flickered in his hand, his body frozen between fear and duty. But then he remembered the widow's words, "If you do nothing, the truth will swallow you." He tightened his grip on the lantern and stepped down into the blackness. The tunnel descended deeper than he imagined, the air growing heavier with every step. Strange markings covered the stone walls, symbols that glowed faintly when his lantern light touched them. They were not human, not alien, but something older. Every step echoed as if the tunnels were awake, listening to him. Finally he reached the chamber. It was vast, stretching into shadows his lantern could not reach, and at the center stood a structure, part machine, part stone, pulsing faintly with a light that seemed alive. The guard's breath caught in his chest. He had never seen anything like it. The widow had spoken the truth. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dusty floor. The machine seemed to hum as if aware of his presence. Strange lines glowed across its surface, forming patterns that moved like rivers of fire. And then he saw it. Human markings, fresh carvings. His leaders had already been here, already studying it, already trying to control it. The guard's stomach twisted. This was what the widow's husband had discovered. This was why he had been killed. This was why she had been silenced. Behind him, the sound of chains rattled. He spun around, his lantern shaking. The widow stood at the entrance. Weak, pale, but free, she had followed him, her glowing eyes fixed on the machine. "You found it," she whispered, her voice trembling. The heart of the storm. The guard rushed to her side, helping her stand. "You were right," he said, his voice low. They were hiding this. They knew all along. The widow's gaze never left the machine. "It is older than both our kinds, older than the stars you travel," she whispered. "It was built to awaken when called, and your leaders have already begun to call." The guard's chest heaved. "Then we have to destroy it," he said. The widow shook her head slowly, sorrow filling her eyes. "It cannot be destroyed, only controlled. And if it wakes fully, it will not see human or alien. It will see only function, to cleanse, to rebuild, to erase what it deems unworthy." The guard felt ice crawl down his spine. "Then what can we do?" he asked, desperate. The widow turned to him, her hollow face lit by the glow of the machine. "Truth," she whispered. "You must bring this to the light. You must show your people what lies beneath. They will call you traitor, they will hunt you, but if you succeed, If enough see the truth, then power cannot hold, and humanity may yet stand. The guard swallowed hard, his throat dry, the weight of her words pressed on him like chains. He was no leader, no hero, only a soldier. But now the fate of everything rested in his choice. Suddenly the chamber shook, the machine's glow flared, lines of light racing faster across its surface. The guard stumbled, catching the widow as she nearly fell. "It is waking," she whispered, fear finally breaking her calm. "They have activated it above. They are using it now." The ground rumbled, dust falling from the ceiling. The guard looked at the machine, its light growing brighter. If it rose, the world would never be the same. There was no more time. He dragged the widow back toward the hatch. "We have to go," he said. "We have to show them." They climbed, the air shaking around them, the roar of the machine echoing below. When they reached the surface, alarms were already blaring, soldiers running through the halls. The guard knew the leaders had realized what he had done. They would kill him without hesitation, but as soldiers turned the corner, weapons raised, he stood tall. "No," he shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "You have been lied to, all of you. The real enemy is beneath us. Not out there." The soldiers froze, confusion in their eyes. The widow pulled the sack from her head, her glowing eyes burning in the dim light. "They silenced me," she cried, her voice carrying across the hall. "They starved me, called me mad because I knew the truth. Your leaders are feeding you to the fire, and when it wakes, none of you will be spared." The guards hesitated, whispers spreading through the hall. For the first time, doubt cracked their obedience. For the first time, they saw the widow not as a monster, but as a witness. An officer stormed forward, fury in his eyes. "Do not listen to her," he roared. "She is insane. She is dangerous." But the soldiers did not lower their weapons. The seed of doubt had been planted. The silence was broken. The chamber shook again, the sound of the machine rising beneath their feet. The widow's voice cut through the fear. "If you keep obeying them, you will all march into your own graves. If you listen, if you see, then maybe, just maybe, humanity will stand." The guard looked at the faces around him, some filled with fear, some with anger, but many with something new, uncertainty. And in that moment he realized the choice was no longer his alone. The truth had spread, and once spoken, it could not be taken back. The machine roared below, the base trembling like a beast ready to rise. But above the noise, above the fear, one truth echoed louder than all. They had listened, and for the first time, humanity's last stand had begun.